Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how we are finally about to see the long theorized, the long rumored, the long talked about, and now widely reported Ocarina of Time remake. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time supposedly is coming out for Zelda's 40th anniversary, which historically Nintendo tends to announce these anniversary stuff around the summertime, in June, in a Nintendo Direct. There are various rumors and reports of there being a Nintendo Direct this week. I'm recording this on a Sunday, so this is the beginning of the week. At some point this week, many different people are saying the Direct will happen. We heard teases by Nash Weedle for Tuesday, then Jeff Grubb as well. Attack the Backlog initially just said sometime this week and has recently said, yep, on Tuesday. And the one that most people buy into, Nate the Hate as well, said there will be a Direct this upcoming week. So many are saying a Direct will happen this week. If you consider the history of things, you consider how long we've waited since the last big general Direct and the need for announcements, and the fact that there weren't any first-party announcements during Summer Games Fest, I think it's pretty clear the Nintendo Direct needs to happen soon. Is it guaranteed it will be happening in this upcoming week? There are no guarantees, so please keep that in mind. But it is the belief by many, myself included, that this is the week when we will be getting the big Nintendo Direct that is going to finally reveal this exciting project from Nintendo, this remake for Ocarina of Time. And we do have a little bit of an update to the Ocarina of Time rumor, which I'll be covering here. But I also just want to talk about the wait, the hype, the wishes, the dreams, all of it, the significance of this. We're finally here. We've been talking about it for so long. But we may finally see what this is in just a few short days here. But first, here's a brief message. I'm sure most of you watching would love to find some additional savings when shopping online, which is why I'm excited to talk about today's sponsor, ShopFox. ShopFox is a browser extension that finds the best savings online through the power of AI. Here's an example. I'm looking for a PS5 here on Amazon at $649. However, when taking a look at ShopFox here, I can find a refurbished one in excellent condition for $449 with free shipping. That's $200 cheaper. That's not bad. To set up ShopFox is pretty simple. You go to the website, which will be linked in the description below, sign up, and then click this button here to add it as an extension to your browser. As another example, let's say we're taking a look at an Apple Watch. I'm trying to buy an Apple Watch Series 11 right here, and it's already at a slight discount on Amazon at $329. However, ShopFox is saying we can save an additional $29.12. So I go over, and here's a few different options, including one at $299.88 on eBay. So that's pretty good savings right there. You can check out ShopFox with the link in the description below. Alright, so here's the rumor update. Nintendo Prime was having a live stream, and Special Nick, who we've talked about several times, who has a history of hearing about Nintendo things and thus far has been pretty much completely accurate in terms of what he's heard, like the Mario Galaxy 2 Remaster, the Switch 2 Mario Kart World Bundle, what we've heard about Metroid Prime 4. There have been different things like this we've heard over the last year or two. But Special Nick said a couple things regarding the Direct. First here he says, looking forward to the Direct next week. That's not necessarily a leak because everyone sort of believes this is already happening. People are just kind of making that assumption. But Nick then also says here, did ask my source to further confirm, and they said yes, and that Ocarina is meant to be there. So I guess the further confirmation that the Direct will be happening this week, because this happened like a day or so ago, but also that Ocarina is going to be there. I think most of us kind of assume this, but it's just one more person putting out that information. And I guess what's interesting about it is that this would be the most up-to-date report that it has been heard that Ocarina of Time is going to be a part of this Nintendo Direct supposedly this week. And so we're going to finally see this. Reminder, Special Nick is also the one who said he had heard that it's supposed to have a big budget. And then there are the other reports that it's supposed to be a full remake. And then we've also talked about how we've seen that patent before the reports, one of the stronger points of evidence that Nintendo would be working on this. All of which to me suggests that they're going to be making some significant changes here. And you look at what Nintendo has done with Star Fox, clearly that's pretty significant. I think that shows kind of like the bare minimum Nintendo would do for the Ocarina of Time remake, which I believe, and I think many would agree, probably is going to be the big game for Nintendo's holiday this year. We've even heard, also from Nick, that there is going to be a special Zelda Switch 2 that comes out around this time, likely having to do with Ocarina of Time. So that's going to be a big push for them later this year. That's the belief, that's what people are hearing, and it just makes a lot of sense, especially when you take into consideration how Nintendo likes to cross-promote things leading up to other things, such as the live-action Zelda movie early next year. And then we also consider we have the Ocarina of Time Lego set. Like, clearly, something's going on here. But I'm just so curious about so many things about this project. How is it going to look? What kind of style are they going to choose? Is it going to be something that kind of matches the original art of Ocarina of Time? That would be very cool. How would that look in 3D though? How might they realize that? But then going beyond the visuals, I think it would be kind of a given that if this is going to be a full remake, as we've been hearing, that there would have to be voice acting added, with some new cutscenes that are very dramatic that would probably be filling in a bit more details here, which would be significant to Zelda lore. I've talked about how I do believe Ocarina of Time may be recontextualized with Tears of the Kingdom in mind. There's a lot of things about Tears of the Kingdom that feel like potential nods to the time period of Ocarina of Time within the Zelda timeline. And so I'm super excited to see that stuff. But then, how much are they going to modernize this game from a gameplay perspective? Are there going to be some substantial changes here? Are they going to revamp the combat so it feels more like modern Zelda? Or perhaps could they be taking it to an even greater level? Reminder of that interview with Aonuma when talking about Age of Imprisonment and how he remarked about how he wanted Nintendo's Zelda game to come out on Switch 2 first before this Age of Imprisonment project by Koei Tecmo, but also that there may be some inspiration from this Age of Imprisonment title that we may see in the Ocarina of Time remake. What would that mean exactly? I know we've considered the possibility that maybe it has to do with the cutscenes, but in my opinion, the story in Age of Imprisonment isn't that strong. And I wouldn't say the cutscenes are really a cut above from what we've seen for Breath or Tears. Like, they're at most around the same level, so I don't really feel that that would be a strong point to make from Aonuma in terms of inspiration they'd be taking for this next project here. But what might make more sense is taking a look at the combat, because I do think the combat in Age of Imprisonment is actually very good. There are so many different weapon sets and abilities and partner attacks. Like, there's a lot of variation and fun to the combat. And while I'm not trying to get at that the Ocarina of Time remake is going to feel like Age of Imprisonment combat, perhaps Nintendo does want to take Zelda combat to another level. I have felt that with Breath of the Wild, and even more so with Tears of the Kingdom, as we've seen more and more bigger open world action adventure games that have these really significant combat systems, that Zelda's has been paling in comparison. And I don't mean in the sense in terms of taking advantage of the physics of the world and using the environment to help you out. That part is cool, that part feels very new, and I want that ability to be resourceful in that way to maintain. In fact, I think Nintendo should continue to expand on that. However, when it comes to swordplay itself, it feels like Zelda has been falling behind, and there's a lot of room for improvement there to expand on that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that with the Ocarina of Time remake potentially, especially because when Ocarina of Time initially came out, there was a huge focus on the combat, so when modernizing it for a full remake, or even somewhat of a reimagining here, there's a huge opportunity there. And even if they're not going to be making substantial changes to the world, or even the dungeons, I do think they need to revamp the bosses. The bosses should be remixed. I think they should be redesigned a little bit. Still, essentially, the same bosses at their core in terms of their essence, but I think they should be scaled up and made more grand, make it feel like more of a grandiose, ambitious battle. Focus on that spectacle. Ocarina of Time is like that quintessential epic adventure game, especially from the 90s. So really going all in on that, I think would also entail redesigning the boss fights. And if you're redesigning the bosses from a visual perspective, I think you should also do it from a gameplay perspective as well. And having a more modernized combat system would be really interesting. But let's go a step further here, just talking about my hopes. I do want them to reimagine more elements. Like with the dungeons, I do want the dungeons to also maintain that essence, but be a new experience. We already have Ocarina of Time through Nintendo Switch Online. Most Switch 2 users can play Ocarina of Time in that way. We've already gotten the remaster of Ocarina of Time 3D on the Nintendo 3DS back in 2011. I don't need Nintendo to release the same game again. I want Ocarina of Time, but a new experience of Ocarina of Time. I'm very much thinking along the lines of what Capcom does with the Resident Evil games. And I've talked about several times already how I think from a business perspective this actually makes a lot of sense. Because by having somewhat of a blueprint by remaking these games, it's a little bit easier to get these experiences out there, and you already know there's going to be an audience for it, so you're more willing to put in that investment. But it's also something that facilitates another pillar of Zelda development. Not just the EPD Zelda team making the open-air Zeldas, and not just Grezzo making the 2D top-down Zeldas, but whoever's coming together here to make this Ocarina of Time remake could then start making other Zelda remakes later down the road as well. This would open the door for Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and maybe they could even consider other Zeldas like Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, some of the 2D Zeldas. Like, there's a lot of opportunity there to have another type of Zelda that Nintendo can work on, and so Zelda could be consistent here. More consistent than it's been. I don't want to wait 6 years for another 3D Zelda. I don't think is good. I don't think that's good for the brand. Nintendo has wanted to keep Zelda pretty frequent, so I think it makes sense from that perspective. But also, given that development cycles are getting increasingly more expensive and they are taking longer, having another pillar of Zelda development certainly helps to remedy that issue. Nintendo's been looking for ways to expand their development teams, and this would be one way to do it. To combat these modern trends of these development challenges, and keep the pace of content coming so the Switch 2 and future Nintendo platforms can continue to engage their audience. It just makes so much sense here. So it's also exciting to think about from that perspective as well. But if these remakes are newer experiences and not just one-to-one visual reworkings, then there can be more of an audience there, the same way it works for the Capcom Resident Evil remakes. And so with that little bit of an argument in mind here, I do have a hope that the dungeons are going to be reworked a bit here. This is going to be more of a new experience in that way, kind of like a retelling of the events, if that makes sense. But then going a step further, I've made the arguments that there should be at least one more new dungeon. I think adding a light temple just makes a lot of sense. There is a reference to a light temple by Rauru when you're in the Chambers of the Sages, which is different from the Temple of Time. I know people may get that confused, and you're given a light medallion without any work. It makes so much sense to add a dungeon in the middle there, a trial to test out Link's new adult form before he sets out into the future world. And then there's also the cut content of the medallions having abilities. When you receive the medallions in Ocarina of Time, they tell you that they are powers that have been bestowed upon you, strength that's been added to yours. But that doesn't reflect in the actual game experience in any way. It's just a key that you use at the very end, which is just through a cutscene. And what's interesting about this, when you really think about it, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have added these mechanics already. When you go through dungeons, you obtain powers of the champions or the sages, and while they are markers of completed dungeons, they are also, like the initial concept of the medallions, abilities, extra strength that you carry with you throughout the adventure. So Nintendo modernizing Ocarina of Time with Breath and Tears in mind, you might think they may go back to this concept here and flesh it out more, which would then also some rethinking of how Ocarina of Time works. I do think if we're talking about a visual remake here and they want to make it look like a modern game that feels right, they're going to have to scale things up. They're going to have to redesign some elements here and there. The world will need to be bigger. I think they need to do away with loading screens. I think opponents should be able to go into different towns and such and not just be locked out just to Hyrule Field and Lake Hylia. I know I'm not the only one who would request this, but it would be nice if they found ways to fill up Hyrule Field a little bit more, maybe adding a few more side quests and things of that nature. So if they are expanding on things here, there's a lot of potential there. And if we're talking about revamped combat here, they could add some combat trials or even other kinds of shrines to take advantage of these new abilities. And so there's so much potential, and I recognize a lot of these are hopes and wishes. I'm not expecting all of this to necessarily come true. As I stated before, if the Ocarina of Time remake is at least along the lines of what we're seeing for Star Fox, that's fine by me. I think that would still be huge and would be very fun, very exciting, and be a pretty big deal, and I would certainly be over the moon hyped to see it in this supposed Nintendo Direct happening later this week. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you haven't subscribed already, but you enjoy my content, please subscribe, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.